All right, it's Pastor Scott with some extra seed for Romans chapter 8. I talked about how this is such a beautiful chapter, and it brings us right back to what happened in the garden. So let's unpack that just a little bit. In Genesis 1 and 2, the first two chapters of the Bible, God creates, all right? From disorder and chaos, He creates order, and He makes this perfect garden setting. And then in that garden setting, He breathes His Spirit into Adam and Eve, so they become alive. Not just physically alive, but spiritually alive. So they are living not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit, until they let their human desires drive them into sin. And through sin, death comes in. This is what Paul talked about in Romans chapter 5. Through one man's disobedience, sin spread to all, and death through sin. That's the condition that we find ourselves in our natural human state. So Paul now, as we talked about in our group, says in Romans chapter 8, we can now live by the Spirit. So in ourself, that Spirit of God, that Ruach of God is breathed in. But there's more. Because in Romans 8, 18 through 25, Paul says, I consider that our present sufferings cannot even be compared to the coming glory that will be revealed in us. Okay, glory, remember we talked about glory refers to the glory of creation in Genesis 1 and 2. That perfection that God created, that included humanity, which He said was very good, but all of creation. So Paul is saying there's a glory yet to come. Verse 19, for the creation eagerly waits for the revelation of the sons of God. For the creation was subject to futility, not willingly, but because of God who subjected it in hope that the creation itself will also be set free from the bondage of decay into the glorious freedom of God's children. So Paul is saying, when sin came in, it didn't just affect you and I. It affected all of creation. And the whole created order was set out of whack, right? Death came in. Disease came in. Through that, we find that injustice and all the issues of sin and humanity's selfishness continued to grow. But God is saying, when Jesus has come and the Spirit has come, it's the promise that when Christ returns, all of creation will be renewed. This is important. Not creation will be destroyed, and not that we will be taken into heaven. Rather, Christ will return, we will be raised, and all of creation will be renewed. This is the picture of Revelation 21 and 22. The first two chapters were about God's beauty of creation and putting His Spirit into humanity. The last two chapters of the Bible is creation renewed, God walking with us in a renewed garden where we dwell with Him and our spirit is connected to Him. Romans 8:22, for we know that the whole creation groans and suffers together until now. Not only this, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we eagerly await our adoption, the redemption of our bodies. So in Romans 8, Paul is not only saying we now are walking in the Spirit and have salvation and forgiveness, but also Christ's death and resurrection is the promise of all of creation being renewed, and when Christ returns, our bodies will be raised and glorified, just like the glorified, resurrected body of Jesus. For in hope we were saved. Hope that is seen is not hope. Who hopes for what he sees? But we hope for what we do not see, and we eagerly wait for it with endurance. So we've been talking about this. Romans is an end times book. And Paul is saying, right now, we have the Spirit, we have righteousness, we have forgiveness, and we walk by the Spirit, not the flesh. But when Christ returns, creation will be renewed, our bodies will be raised and glorified, and the glory of God will be complete. And we look for it with hope and with endurance, knowing that that day is coming. So, the beauty of all of God that is yet to come is part of our hope of glory. And that's what Paul unpacks in Romans chapter 8. That's your extra seed for this week. Celebrate it in your group. Look forward to seeing you next week.